I woke up again last night. It was the third time this week that something pulled me out of sleep. It's strange because I'm usually a heavy sleeper, but lately I've been waking up in the middle of the night, sweating, my heart beating too fast. The room feels colder than usual, even though it's summer. The air is thick, like it's pressing down on me. I hear something, a soft rustling sound. I try to ignore it, tell myself it's just the wind outside, or maybe an old pipe groaning. It's probably nothing. That's what I keep telling myself. But then, the noise comes again. It's not loud, just a faint, almost whisper-like sound coming from the closet. I think about getting up to check, but my body doesn't move. I lie there, frozen, trying to convince myself that it's all in my head. Maybe it's just the house settling, or maybe I left something in there that's shifting. After all, this place is old, full of creaks and groans at night. Eventually, I manage to fall asleep again, pushing the uneasy feeling deep down. A few nights later, I hear it again. This time, the noise is a bit louder. It's the same soft rustling, like someone is moving inside the closet. I tell myself it's the wind, or maybe a mouse. I'm not good at dealing with small things like that. I hate mice, but I hate the idea of checking the closet more. What if I find something? Or worse, what if I don't? So I lie there, pretending it's nothing, even though I can't shake the feeling that something is off. The next day, I open the closet, trying to prove to myself that I'm just being paranoid. I half expect to see something, maybe a fallen jacket or a shoe that's shifted. But when I look inside, everything is exactly where it should be, neatly arranged. No signs of anything unusual. I feel a bit silly for worrying so much, so I close the door and go on with my day, trying to push the thoughts away. But the unease doesn't leave. Every night I find myself waking up, hearing that sound. And every night I convince myself it's nothing. I don't know why I'm so afraid to check thoroughly. Maybe it's because deep down I know something isn't right, and I'm scared to find out what it is. Then it happened. Last night was different. I was sleeping, finally feeling like maybe it was all just my imagination, when a loud thump jolted me awake. My eyes snapped open, and my heart started racing. The sound came from the closet. This time, there was no mistaking it. Someone or something was in there. I wanted to ignore it, pretend it wasn't real, but I couldn't. The fear had taken over. Slowly, I sat up, my hands trembling as I reached for the light on my nightstand. The room filled with a soft yellow glow, but it didn't make me feel any safer. My eyes were fixed on the closet door. I could feel my pulse in my throat, and for a moment, I considered just lying back down, pulling the covers over my head like a scared kid. But I couldn't. I had to know. My feet touched the cold floor and I stood up, my legs feeling weak. I walked towards the closet, each step heavier than the last. I reached out, hesitated for a moment, then grabbed the handle. My hand was shaking as I turned it, the door creaking open. Inside, there was a man. He was crouched in the corner, his eyes wide and wild, staring right at me. In his hand, he held a knife, the blade catching the light from my lamp. For a second, neither of us moved. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. Why was he here? How long had he been hiding there? My mind raced with questions, but I couldn't form a single word. He started to stand up, moving slowly, almost calmly, like he had all the time in the world. I felt my breath catch in my throat as he straightened up, his eyes never leaving mine. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. We just stared at each other, the silence between us growing heavier by the second. I don't know what made me do it, but suddenly, I slammed the door shut with all my strength. I heard the thud as it closed, and then I was running. I don't even remember getting to the front door, but I must have, because the next thing I knew I was outside, barefoot on the cold concrete, my phone in my hand. I don't know how I managed to dial the police, but I did. My voice was shaking so badly I could barely tell them what happened. The police came quickly. They found him still in the closet, the knife in his hand. He didn't resist when they took him away. I watched from the doorway, my whole body shaking, as they led him out in handcuffs. One of the officers told me that the man had been living in the closet for days, maybe longer, watching me, waiting for the right moment to attack. Even now, I can't believe it. How did I not know? How did I miss the signs? Every time I think about it, I feel sick. I haven't been able to sleep since. Every little noise makes me jump, and I keep checking the closet even though I know he's not there anymore. The worst part is, I can't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I'm not alone. The locked door. I moved into the apartment about a month ago. It was small but cozy, and the price was too good to pass up. I needed a fresh start, and this place seemed perfect. The landlord was a quiet man, in his late 50s maybe, and he didn't talk much. When he handed me the keys, he quickly mentioned something about one of the rooms being locked. He said it was for storage, and I wasn't allowed in there. I didn't think much of it at the time. I had plenty of space for my things, so one locked door didn't bother me. At first, everything was fine. I unpacked, settled in, and started getting used to my new place. But as the days passed, I started feeling strange. It's hard to explain. I began to notice the locked door more. Every time I walked by, it was like it was calling to me, almost begging me to open it. I tried to ignore it, but my curiosity grew stronger each day. Then the noises started. At night, when everything was quiet, I would hear soft thuds and scraping sounds coming from behind the door. At first, I thought it was just the building settling, or maybe pipes, but it didn't sound like that. It sounded like something, or someone, was moving in there. I asked the landlord about it again, trying to be casual, but he just shrugged it off. He said it was an old building, and weird noises were normal. But there was something in his eyes that told me he was hiding something. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was keeping something from me. The more I thought about it, the more obsessed I became. What was behind that door? Why was it locked? Why wouldn't he tell me the truth? I started having trouble sleeping. The noises got louder, more frequent. It was driving me crazy. One night, after a particularly bad day at work, I snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a screwdriver and headed for the door. My hands were shaking as I jammed the screwdriver into the lock, but I didn't care. I had to know what was inside. It took some time, but finally, I heard the click of the lock giving way. My heart was pounding in my chest as I slowly pushed the door open. The room was dark, and the air was thick with dust. I fumbled for the light switch and flicked it on. The sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. The walls were stained with dark, dry blood. There were deep scratches on the floor, like someone had been dragged across it. In the corner of the room, there was a small, old wooden bed, the mattress torn and filthy. And on the floor, partially hidden under a pile of old clothes, was a diary. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't stop myself. I picked it up and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was messy, almost frantic. The first few entries were normal enough, just someone writing about their day, their thoughts. But then it started getting dark. The writer talked about someone watching them, following them. They wrote about hearing noises at night, much like the ones I'd been hearing. They mentioned the landlord, how he was always around, always watching them with those cold eyes. The entries became more and more paranoid, more desperate. Then came the last entry. It was short, just a few lines scribbled hastily. I can't take it anymore. I know he's going to kill me. He's been in the room again. I can hear him moving around when I'm asleep. If anyone finds this, please get out while you still can. He's watching you too. The diary ended there, abruptly, as if the writer had been interrupted. I dropped it on the floor, my hands trembling. I felt sick, like I was going to throw up. I couldn't believe what I'd just read. Was it real? Was the writer just paranoid? Or had something really happened to them? I backed out of the room, slamming the door shut behind me. I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath, but the fear wouldn't leave me. I couldn't stop thinking about the last entry, about the person who had written it. Were they talking about the landlord? Was he the one who had hurt them? And then I realized something that made my blood freeze. The noises. I could still hear them. But now, they weren't just behind the door. They were closer. They were coming from inside the apartment. I turned around slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The hallway was empty, but I could feel someone watching me. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the apartment, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. I ran down the stairs and out onto the street, not stopping until I was far away from that place. I didn't go back. I couldn't. I left everything behind. My clothes, my furniture, even the diary. I didn't care. I just wanted to be as far away from that apartment as possible. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. I keep looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone there. I hear noises at night, and every time I do, I remember the diary. I remember those last words. He's watching you too. And I can't help but wonder, did I really escape? Or is he still out there, waiting for the right moment to find me again? The night shift. Working the night shift at a gas station always seemed like the perfect job for me. It was quiet, simple, and I liked being alone with my thoughts. The hours would pass slowly, but I didn't mind. There was something peaceful about the empty roads and the hum of the fluorescent lights above. The station was small, just off a deserted highway, and the customers were few and far between during the late hours. Most nights, the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees outside or the occasional car passing by. It felt like I was the only person awake in the whole world. But that night, something felt different. It was around 1 a.m. when I first noticed the car. It drove by slowly without headlights. At first, I didn't think much of it, just someone trying to save their battery maybe. But when it passed by again an hour later, still without headlights, I started to feel uneasy. The car didn't speed up or slow down as it passed the station. It just cruised by, almost as if it was watching me. I could barely see inside because of the dark, but I caught a glimpse of the driver's face. He was staring straight at me, his expression blank and unreadable. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was lost or just passing time, driving around the area. But when the car came by a third time, I started to feel a growing sense of dread. Each time, the same slow speed, the same staring eyes. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the small tasks that kept me busy, restocking shelves, cleaning the counter, checking the inventory. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The fourth time the car passed, it was different. Right after it drove by, the power in the station went out. The whole place was plunged into darkness, and I was left standing in the middle of the store, my heart pounding in my chest. The emergency lights kicked. I never thought a simple argument would lead to this, waking up in complete darkness, with dirt pressing against my face and chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs. The last thing I remember was shouting at Jake, my best friend. We were fighting about something stupid, a disagreement that turned into something uglier. I thought it was just another fight, like so many before. But now, I'm not so sure. The darkness around me is absolute. It's not like closing your eyes or being in a room with the lights off. No, this darkness is thick, suffocating, and it feels like it's pressing down on me from all sides. When I try to move my arms, they don't go far. The dirt is everywhere, heavy and cold. I start to panic, realizing I'm buried alive. My first instinct is to scream, but when I open my mouth, dirt pours in. I cough and choke, spitting it out as best as I can. But the more I struggle, the more it seems like the dirt is closing in on me, filling the small space where I can still breathe. I have to calm down, I tell myself, but it's hard to listen to reason when your brain is screaming at you to survive. I try to think back to what happened. I remember storming out of Jake's house, slamming the door behind me. He was supposed to be my friend, but in that moment, I hated him. The way he looked at me, the things he said, he knew exactly how to push my buttons. But would he really go this far? Would he really try to kill me? I can't believe it. But as I lie here, the realization starts to sink in. Who else could have done this? We were alone that night, and I don't remember anything else after I left his house. I must have been knocked out, maybe by him, maybe by someone he knows. I don't know how, but I ended up here, buried alive. The thought makes my skin crawl. I try to focus on getting out. I need to get out. I start clawing at the dirt above me, but it's hard to tell if I'm making any progress. My fingers are raw and the dirt is so thick, it's like trying to dig through wet cement. Every time I pull some away, more just falls in to take its place. I can feel the walls of this tiny space closing in, like the dirt is alive, determined to keep me here. The air is getting thinner. I can feel it, each breath taking more effort than the last. My lungs burn, and my head is starting to spin. I'm running out of time. I try to keep digging, focusing all my strength on one spot, hoping that if I can just break through, I'll find air, light, something that isn't this suffocating darkness. But the more I dig, the more desperate I become. Jake's face keeps flashing in my mind, his smirk, the way he taunted me during the argument. I start to wonder if he planned this, if he knew exactly what he was doing when he pushed me to my limit. Did he set me up? Was this all some sick joke? Or did he really want me dead? My thoughts are racing, and I can't tell what's real anymore. I want to believe that he wouldn't do this. But then why am I here? Why can't I remember how I got here? My hands are bleeding now, fingers shredded from digging through the dirt. I don't know how long I've been at it, but I'm so tired. Every muscle in my body is screaming for rest, but I can't stop. If I stop, I die. I try to dig faster, but I'm so weak. My breaths are coming in short, sharp gasps, and I can feel my heart pounding in my chest. It feels like it could burst at any moment. I'm not sure how much time has passed, but it feels like forever. I start to hear things, footsteps maybe. Or is it just my imagination? Am I hallucinating? I can't tell anymore. I want to scream for help, but I'm too weak. My voice barely comes out as a whisper, and I know no one will hear me. I keep digging, even though it feels hopeless. My vision is blurring, and I'm on the edge of passing out. But then, just as I'm about to give up, I hear something. It's faint, but it's there. A scraping sound, like someone digging. I try to focus on it, but my mind is slipping away. Is it Jake? Is he coming back to finish the job? Or is someone actually trying to save me? I don't know what to believe anymore. My world is spinning, the darkness is closing in, and I'm not sure if I'll make it out alive. The last thing I feel is the dirt pressing down on me, heavy and cold as everything fades to black. And then, nothing. The fake taxi last Friday. After a long week of work, I went out with some friends. We met at a bar near downtown, a place where the music is too loud and the drinks are too expensive. But we didn't care, we just wanted to relax. The night passed in a blur of laughter, a few too many drinks, and conversations that started to blend together. By the time I realized it was late, I was the last one left at the bar. The streets outside were quiet, the usual city noise muffled by the cool night air. My head was buzzing from the alcohol, and all I could think about was getting home. I pulled out my phone, but the battery was dead. Great, just great, I thought. I stumbled towards the main road, hoping to find a taxi. It didn't take long. A car with a taxi sign on top slowed down next to me. I didn't even look at the company name. I was too tired, and all I wanted was to be in bed. The driver rolled down the window and with a friendly smile asked where I was headed. I told him my address, and he nodded, unlocking the door. I got in, sinking into the back seat. The inside of the car smelled like leather and something else I couldn't place. The driver made small talk as we drove, asking about my night if I had fun. I answered without really thinking, my mind already drifting, ready to fall asleep. Everything seemed normal at first. Then, after a few minutes, I noticed we were not on the usual route. I didn't recognize the streets. I've lived in this city for years, and this wasn't the way home. I frowned and leaned forward a little, trying to see out the window more clearly. Maybe it was a shortcut, I thought, but the buildings were getting fewer and the roads narrower. Is this the right way? I asked, trying to sound casual. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his smile still there but different now, less friendly. Yeah, don't worry, he said, but his tone didn't match the words. Something felt off, and my tiredness started to fade, replaced by a cold, creeping anxiety. The roads became even more unfamiliar. We were heading out of the city, not towards my neighborhood. My heart began to race, and I felt a knot forming in my stomach. I leaned forward again, my voice shaking a little this time. Where are we going? The driver didn't answer. He just stared straight ahead, his smile now completely gone. My unease turned to fear, sharp and undeniable, when I heard the soft click of the doors locking. I tried to stay calm, telling myself there was an explanation, but the rising panic made it hard to think straight. Let me out, I said, my voice cracking as I reached for the door handle. It didn't move. The driver kept driving, faster now, the city lights disappearing in the distance behind us. My breath came in short, panicked bursts, my mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. I banged on the window, shouting, "Stop the car! Let me out!" But he ignored me. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and I could see the muscles in his jaw tense. He wasn't just ignoring me. He was deliberately taking me somewhere far away from help, from anyone who could hear me scream. Desperation took over. I searched the back seat for something, anything I could use. My hands shook as I felt around, and then I found it, a small metal object wedged between the seat and the door. It felt sharp, and I grabbed it, not even caring what it was. The car slowed down slightly as we approached a deserted intersection. My heart pounded in my ears as I fumbled with the object, trying to figure out how to use it. My fingers finally found a way to push it into the lock mechanism. I didn't know if it would work, but I had no other choice. As the car came to a near stop, I heard a faint click. The door wasn't fully unlocked, but it gave a little enough for me to force it open. I didn't think. I just acted, pushing the door open and throwing myself out of the car. I hit the ground hard, the rough pavement scraping my hands and knees, but I didn't care. I was out. The car sped off as soon as I jumped, the driver not even slowing down to see if I was okay. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, my whole body shaking. Then I got up, my legs weak but moving, and started walking, not knowing where I was but needing to get away from that road. I finally reached a small house after what felt like hours of stumbling through the dark. I knocked on the door, my knuckles bleeding, and when a confused-looking man answered, I just collapsed into sobs, trying to explain what had happened. He called the police, who took my statement, but the driver was never found. Now, every time I see a taxi, I feel that same knot in my stomach. I can't get into one without remembering that night, the driver's cold smile and the locked doors. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't jumped out, and I don't want to think about it. But I do know one thing. I'll never feel safe in a taxi again. When I first moved into this neighborhood, I didn't know what to expect. The houses were close together and everyone seemed friendly enough. But there was something strange about my next-door neighbor, Mr. Jameson. He was a tall, quiet man with graying hair, always polite, but there was something off about him. I would hear strange noises coming from his house late at night, clanking, muffled cries, sounds that I couldn't quite place. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but it stuck with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. So, when Mr. Jameson invited me over for dinner one evening, I was surprised. I'd lived here for a few months, and though we had exchanged pleasantries, we had never really spoken. Still, I thought it might be a good chance to get to know him better, maybe put my mind at ease about those noises. I accepted his invitation. His house was much like mine, but older, with furniture that seemed to have been there for decades. The dinner was simple: roast chicken, potatoes, and some wine. Mr. Jameson was very eager to keep the conversation going, asking me about my life, my work, but never really talking about himself. The more we talked, the more I felt something was wrong. Maybe it was the way he kept filling my glass with wine, or how his eyes darted around whenever I mentioned the noises. But I pushed the feeling aside, convincing myself I was overthinking things. After a few glasses of wine, I felt the need to use the bathroom. Mr. Jameson pointed me down the hallway, but in my slightly tipsy state, I must have taken a wrong turn. Instead of the bathroom, I found myself at the top of a staircase leading down into the basement. The door was slightly ajar, and I could feel a cool draft coming from below. That's when I heard it again, a soft, muffled cry, like someone was in pain. I don't know what made me do it, but I started down the stairs. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was just my curiosity finally getting the better of me. The basement was dark and musty, filled with old furniture, boxes stacked high against the walls, and a faint smell of something rotten. I could hear the cries getting louder as I moved deeper into the room. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking. Then I saw it, a heavy, locked door on the far side of the basement. The wood was scratched, as if someone, or something, had been trying desperately to get out. The cries were coming from behind that door, clearer now, filled with fear. I froze, torn between the urge to run back upstairs and the need to know what was behind that door. I don't know why, but I found myself searching for a key. My hands were moving on their own, rummaging through the dusty shelves, the old toolboxes. I found it eventually, a rusty old key hidden in a drawer. My hand trembled as I brought it to the lock, and for a moment, I almost backed out. But something inside me pushed forward, turning the key and slowly opening the door. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. There, inside the room, were several cages, each containing a person. No, not just people, but broken, terrified souls. Their eyes were hollow, their bodies weak and thin, some too far gone to even move. They looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear, silently begging for help. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The strange noises I had heard at night, the cries, the clanking. It all made sense now. Mr. Jameson had been keeping these people here, locked away in his basement. But why? My mind raced with questions, but I knew I didn't have time to think. I needed to get out of there. I started to back away, my heart pounding in my ears. I was so focused on escaping that I didn't hear the footsteps behind me until it was too late. I turned to see Mr. Jameson standing at the top of the stairs, blocking my way out. He was smiling, holding something small in his hand. "Looking for this?" he asked, his voice calm, almost amused. He held up a small key, the key to the bathroom I had been searching for earlier. My blood ran cold. He knew I had been in the basement. He knew I had seen everything. And now, there was no way out. I was trapped, just like the people in those cages. I tried to speak, to explain, to beg, but no words came out. My mind was racing, trying to find a way to escape, but I knew it was hopeless. Mr. Jameson took a step closer, still smiling, that same eerie smile. I could feel the walls closing in on me, the darkness of the basement swallowing me whole. The last thing I remember is his hand reaching out toward me, that smile never leaving his face. I don't know what happened after that, or how I managed to get out of the house. Maybe I ran, maybe he let me go, I don't know. All I know is that I'm safe now, but I can't sleep. I can't eat. All I can think about are those people in the basement, and that smile. That smile will haunt me for the rest of my life. I never reported him. Who would believe me? A newcomer with a wild story about a neighbor with a basement full of prisoners? No one would believe me. But every night I lie awake, waiting for the sound of footsteps, for the sound of that key turning in my door. I've always been a light sleeper, but living alone has made me even more aware of every sound in my apartment. My place is small, just a one-bedroom in a quiet building on the edge of town. I've always felt safe here, mostly because I double-check all the locks before going to bed. It's become a routine. Lock the door, check the windows, make sure everything is in place. I've never really had a reason to worry. A few nights ago, though, I started hearing strange noises. At first, I thought it was just the building settling, or maybe the neighbors upstairs. It was nothing loud, just the occasional creak or soft thump. I brushed it off, telling myself it was nothing. But then, last night, everything changed. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. The room was dark, the kind of darkness where you can't see your hand in front of your face. But something felt wrong. I had that uneasy feeling, like when you know someone is watching you, even if you can't see them. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe it was just a bad dream. I turned over, pulling the blanket tighter around me, but the feeling didn't go away. And then I saw it. At the foot of my bed, there was a figure. I couldn't make out any details, just a shadowy outline of someone sitting there, watching me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt paralyzed, unable to move or even breathe. This wasn't a dream. This was real. I couldn't understand how this person had gotten into my apartment. I was sure I had locked everything before I went to bed. My mind raced, trying to figure out what was happening, but the fear was overwhelming. I didn't dare to move, hoping that if I stayed still, maybe they would go away. The figure didn't move. It just sat there, staring at me. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the sound of my own breathing, which seemed too loud in the stillness. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen. My eyes darted around the room looking for something, anything that I could use to defend myself. My phone was on the nightstand, just out of reach. I could feel the sweat on my palms as I slowly, so slowly began to inch my hand toward it. But then, the figure stood up. Every muscle in my body tensed as I watched it rise from the bed. The movement was slow, deliberate, and it filled me with a dread I can't even begin to describe. I knew I had to act fast. With a burst of adrenaline, I grabbed my phone and leaped out of bed. My hand knocked over a lamp as I bolted toward the door, the crash echoing in the quiet apartment. I could hear the figure moving behind me, the sound of footsteps quickening as I fumbled with the lock. My hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't get the door open right away. My heart was pounding in my ears, drowning out everything else. Finally, the lock clicked, and I yanked the door open, practically falling into the hallway. I didn't look back as I ran out of my apartment and down the stairs. I was too scared to see if the figure was following me. All I could think about was getting out, getting away. When I reached the lobby, I frantically dialed 911, my fingers barely able to press the buttons. The police arrived quickly, but when they went back up to my apartment, they found nothing. No sign of anyone having been there, no forced entry, nothing out of place except the lamp I had knocked over. They checked every room, every closet, but it was like the figure had just disappeared. They tried to reassure me, telling me it was probably just a vivid nightmare. But I knew what I saw. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything. I kept going over it in my mind, trying to figure out how someone could have gotten in without leaving any trace. I even thought about staying with a friend for a few nights, but something in me wanted to stay, to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. Then, this morning, I found something that made my blood run cold. On my nightstand, where my phone usually sits, there was a small folded piece of paper. My hands shook as I picked it up and unfolded it. The note was short, written in neat, precise handwriting. "I'll be back." I don't know how it got there. I didn't hear anything last night, and I know I locked all the doors and windows, just like I always do. But the note was there, as real as the fear that's been gnawing at me since that night. I've been trying to tell myself it's a prank, that maybe someone is messing with me. But deep down, I know it's not that simple. I haven't called the police again. What would I tell them? They already think I'm imagining things. And maybe I am. Maybe the stress is getting to me, making me see things that aren't there. But I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching me, waiting. I haven't slept in days, too afraid to close my eyes, too afraid of what might happen if I do. I keep checking the locks, but it doesn't make me feel any safer. Every noise, every shadow puts me on edge. I don't know what to do, but I know one thing for sure. I can't stay here much longer. I can still feel those eyes on me, even now, as I write this. I don't know who they are or what they want, but I'm terrified they're coming back. And this time, I might not be so lucky. The confession. It was supposed to be a relaxing trip. We had spent the weekend at a small cabin in the mountains, far from the noise of the city. Just me and my best friend, Mark. We had been friends since childhood, so I felt safe with him. But something was different on that drive back. The air in the car was thick, and I noticed Mark was driving faster than usual, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. I tried to start a conversation, but he just nodded, eyes locked on the road ahead. At first, I thought he was just tired, maybe stressed about getting back to work. The weekend had been perfect, hiking, grilling, and just enjoying the peace. But now, there was this tension I couldn't shake. It felt like the calm before a storm, a strange silence that made me feel uneasy. We had been driving for about an hour when Mark suddenly spoke. His voice was low, almost too quiet to hear over the hum of the engine. He said he needed to tell me something, something he had kept hidden for a long time. I laughed nervously, thinking he was going to confess some silly secret, like he had a crush on someone we knew or that he had lost something important during the trip. But what he said next made my blood run cold. Mark confessed to a crime, a serious crime. He told me that 2 years ago, he had killed someone. It wasn't an accident. He said he had planned it, waited for the right moment, and then he did it. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the car. My mind couldn't process what he was saying. This was Mark, my best friend, someone I trusted more than anyone. How could he have done something like that? He kept talking, the words spilling out faster and faster, as if he couldn't stop. He described the details, each one more horrifying than the last. He didn't just kill the person. He made sure they suffered. I wanted to tell him to stop, to shut up, and never speak of it again. But I was frozen in my seat, my hands trembling. I could hardly breathe. As he continued, it hit me. Hard. I was the only one who knew now. He had kept this secret buried for so long, and now that it was out, I realized I was a loose end. He started talking about how no one could ever find out, how careful he had been, and how important it was that this stayed between us. My heart pounded in my chest. I wasn't just scared. I was terrified. I was trapped in a moving car with a killer, someone I thought I knew, but who was now a complete stranger to me. I tried to keep calm, to not let him see how scared I was. My mind raced with possibilities. Should I jump out of the car? Should I try to call for help? But we were in the middle of nowhere, with no signal and no one around for miles. I didn't even know where we were exactly. Mark noticed my silence and looked over at me. His eyes were different, cold, calculating. He smiled slightly and told me not to worry, that he trusted me. But the way he said it, like he was testing me, made me even more afraid. I knew I had to do something, but I couldn't figure out what. I forced myself to nod, to smile back at him, pretending to understand, to agree. Inside, I was screaming. I needed to buy time, to find a way out. But Mark wasn't acting like himself anymore. He was talking faster, his words jumbled, like he was losing control. He started ranting about how he had been wronged, how the world was unfair, and how he did what he had to do. His mood swung from calm to angry in seconds, making me flinch every time he raised his voice. I realized then that Mark wasn't just dangerous, he was unstable. His guilt and paranoia were eating him alive, and I was stuck in the middle of it. I had to make a decision, and fast. But every idea seemed like it would only make things worse. I thought about grabbing the wheel, forcing the car off the road. But what if that didn't work? What if he survived and I didn't? Or worse, what if we both survived, and he was even more desperate? We were getting closer to the city now, the empty roads giving way to signs of life. Cars, houses, people. I could see my chance to escape, but I had to be careful. Mark was still talking, but I wasn't listening anymore. My focus was on the road ahead, on finding a moment where I could make a move. But then, Mark did something that made my heart stop. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a gun. He laid it on his lap, his fingers brushing over it like it was something precious. He told me that he had kept it with him ever since, just in case. In case of what? I didn't want to find out. I knew this was my last chance. The traffic light ahead turned red, and Mark slowed the car to a stop. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly think, but I knew I had to act now or never. As soon as the car stopped, I unbuckled my seatbelt, threw open the door, and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't care about anything except getting away. I could hear Mark shouting behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran through the streets, dodging cars, ignoring the confused looks of people around me. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get as far away as possible. And then, suddenly, everything went quiet. I stopped, panting, my heart racing. I was alone now, in an empty alley. I didn't know if Mark was following me, if he was still out there, or if he had given up. But I knew one thing. I could never go back. I could never look at him the same way again. But even as I write this, I wonder, am I safe now? Or is it just a matter of time before he finds me again? It started with a wrong number. At least, I thought it was wrong. The first few times, I didn't even pick up. Random unknown numbers aren't uncommon, and they almost always want something from you: money, time, attention. But when the calls kept coming, day after day, at strange hours, I started to get uneasy. At first, I just hung up. But then the messages started. Where's the money? Don't think you can hide forever. I brushed it off as some scam, but the tone was different. It felt personal, like they knew me. Except they didn't, because they kept calling me by a name that wasn't mine. Mark. Mark, we need to talk. You know what this is about. It's time to pay up. That was one of the first texts I opened. I almost replied. But then I figured it would be better to just block the number and forget it. But they found me on other numbers, other accounts, always calling me Mark. The night it got real, I was coming home late from work. My apartment building is in a quiet part of town. It's not fancy, but it's home. I was tired, just wanting to crash on my couch and forget the day. As I approached the entrance, 3 men stepped out of the shadows. I hadn't even noticed them until one grabbed my arm. "Where do you think you're going, Mark?" I froze, the confusion and fear hitting me all at once. "I'm not Mark." "You've got the wrong guy," I stammered, trying to pull away, but their grip tightened. "Cut the crap," the one holding me growled. "We've been patient, but your time's up. We want the money now." "I don't have any money. I'm not who you think I am." My voice shook, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I could see it in their eyes. They didn't believe me. "You've got 3 days, Mark. After that, we're done talking." Then they let me go, just like that. I stumbled back into my apartment, locked the door, and checked it again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I called the police, but when they arrived, there wasn't much they could do. I didn't know who these men were or why they thought I was this Mark guy. The officers left, telling me to be careful, but I knew they weren't going to solve anything. The next few days were a blur of fear and frustration. The calls didn't stop. The messages got worse, more threatening. My friends started to notice I was acting strange, but when I tried to explain, they just didn't understand. They thought it was some prank, or maybe that I was overreacting. I couldn't blame them. How could they know what it felt like to be hunted like this? I did some digging of my own, trying to figure out who this Mark was. It wasn't easy, but I started to find traces. An old social media account, a few shady connections, but nothing solid enough to show the police. The more I looked, the more it seemed like Mark had vanished, leaving his mess for me to deal with. There were even some bills in my mailbox with his name on them. I hadn't noticed them before, but now they stood out like a bad joke. When the 3 days were up, I knew they would come back. I didn't have a plan, just a desperate urge to get away. I packed a bag and left my apartment, thinking if I could just disappear for a while, maybe they would lose track of me. But they were waiting for me. I barely made it down the street before I saw them again. They weren't hiding this time. They wanted me to see them, to know that I couldn't run. My pulse raced as I turned and ran, but I didn't get far. They caught me in an alley, and this time there was no escape. "You're not going anywhere, Mark," one of them spat as they cornered me. "It's time to pay up. Please," I begged. "I'm not Mark. You have to believe me." They didn't care. To them, I was just a liar trying to worm my way out of a debt. One of them pulled out a knife, and I thought that was it, that I was going to die for someone else's mistakes. My mind raced, trying to think of something, anything that could save me. And then, Almost like a miracle, my phone buzzed in my pocket. "Check my phone," I said quickly, my voice trembling. "Please, just check it." The leader looked at me suspiciously but grabbed the phone. The screen showed a missed call from a number I didn't recognize, but something about it made him pause. He answered, putting it on speaker. A voice crackled through, a name being called out, Mark's name. The men exchanged glances, their grip on me loosening just slightly. They spoke in hushed tones, but I couldn't make out the words. Finally, the leader handed back my phone, shoving me roughly against the wall. "Looks like you got lucky, but we'll be watching," he warned. "Don't think this is over." They walked away, leaving me slumped on the ground, my heart still racing. The relief was overwhelming, but it was mixed with a terror that wouldn't go away. They had spared me, for now, but I knew it was only a matter of time before something else happened. I didn't go back to my apartment. I couldn't. I stayed in a cheap motel, living in constant fear that they would return, or worse, that they would find Mark and somehow connect us again. Every knock on the door, every unfamiliar face on the street sent me into a panic. And now, as I write this, I know I'm not safe. They might be gone, but the fear remains. The nightmare doesn't end just because they walked away. I don't know if they'll come back or if I'll ever be able to stop looking over my shoulder. But one thing's for sure, my life will never be the same. It happened on a night that was supposed to be like any other. I was driving home after a long day, tired and eager to get back to my bed. The road was deserted, not a single car in sight. The darkness pressed in around me, only the headlights cutting through the pitch-black night. I was half asleep, my mind wandering, thinking about nothing in particular. Then it happened. Something darted out in front of me, a shadow in the middle of the road. I didn't have time to react. The car hit something solid, and I felt the impact through the steering wheel, a sickening thud that made my stomach lurch. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car came to a screeching halt, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't want to look. I couldn't. But I had to. I forced myself to glance in the rearview mirror, hoping, praying that it was just an animal, a deer maybe, something I could forget about. But it wasn't. There, lying on the road behind me, was a body. A person. I couldn't make out the details in the dark, but I knew. I knew I had hit someone. Panic surged through me, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do? Call the police? Get out and check? But what if they were dead? What if someone saw? The road was empty, the night still and quiet. No witnesses. No one would know if I just drove away. The thought was disgusting, vile, but it took hold of me, wrapping around my mind like a snake. I didn't want to go to jail. I didn't want my life to end because of one mistake, one accident. I made the decision before I could think too much about it. I stepped on the gas, my hands trembling as I drove away, leaving the scene behind. My heart was still racing, my mind a blur of fear and guilt. I told myself it was an accident, that it wasn't my fault. But deep down, I knew. I knew I had done something terrible. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the body lying on the road, still and lifeless. My mind kept replaying the moment of impact, the thud, the way the car jolted. I felt sick, disgusted with myself, but there was nothing I could do now. It was done. I had made my choice. The next morning, the sunlight felt wrong, too bright, too harsh. Everything was wrong. I went outside, hoping that maybe it was all just a nightmare. But when I saw the dent on the front bumper, the dried blood, reality hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, staring at it, my mind blank. I wanted to scream, to cry, but all I could do was stand there, frozen. I thought about washing it off, but that felt wrong too, like I was trying to erase what I had done. Instead, I went inside, locked the door, and sat down, trying to convince myself that no one knew. No one had seen. I was safe. Then my phone buzzed. I almost didn't check it. I was too on edge, my nerves shot. But I did. And when I saw the message, my heart stopped. I saw what you did. That was all it said. 6 words that turned my blood to ice. Who could have sent this? How did they know? I hadn't seen anyone on the road. It was empty, deserted. Or so I thought. I stared at the message, my hands shaking. This had to be some kind of sick joke, right? But how could they know? Fear twisted in my gut, and I felt like I was going to be sick. I tried to think, to figure out what to do, but my mind was blank. All I could focus on were those words, repeating over and over in my head. That day, I deleted all my social media, erased everything that could link me to that night. I didn't go to work. I didn't talk to anyone. I just stayed in my apartment waiting for the next message because I knew there would be another one. And there was. The messages kept coming, each one worse than the last. You didn't even stop to check. What kind of person does that? Each time they knew more, details only someone who was there could know. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow sent my heart racing. I started avoiding people, avoiding places where someone might recognize me. I couldn't trust anyone. Every time I went outside, I felt eyes on me, watching, judging. Then, one night, the final message came. Meet me, or I'll go to the police. It came with an address, a place out of town, isolated. My hands were sweating, heart pounding as I read it. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to face whoever this was, but what choice did I have? I couldn't let them go to the police. I had to know who they were, what they wanted. The drive felt like it took forever, even though it was only an hour outside of town. The whole way, my mind was racing, trying to figure out who it could be, why they hadn't gone to the police already. When I arrived, it was dark, the kind of darkness that swallows everything. There was no one there, just an empty clearing with a single rock in the middle. My heart was in my throat as I got out of the car, sweat dripping down my face. I walked to the rock, every step feeling like I was walking to my own execution. On the rock was a phone, the screen lit up with the last message. Before I could do anything, I heard a car approach. The headlights were blinding, and I couldn't see who got out. I wanted to run, to hide, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure stepped closer, stopping just out of reach. I couldn't see their face, just a shadow. You thought you could get away with it? The voice was cold, emotionless. I tried to speak, to explain, but nothing came out. They tossed a bag at my feet, and I flinched. Inside the bag was a camera, the screen showing the accident, the moment I hit the person. The screen went black, and I heard footsteps moving away, fading into the night. I was left standing there, holding the camera, with no idea what to do next. I was alone, with evidence that could destroy me in my hands, and the realization that my life would never be the same. I never thought a prank could go so wrong. It was supposed to be a harmless joke, just something to pass the time. My friends and I, we'd always pull pranks on each other or on random people around town. Nothing too serious, just fun. But this time, we picked the wrong target. The old man lived alone on the edge of town. We used to see him walking by himself, always with a cane and a hat pulled low over his eyes. He didn't talk to anyone, didn't seem to have any friends or family, just a lonely old guy. So we thought, why not mess with him a little? It wasn't meant to be mean, just a way to liven things up. But now I wish we'd never even thought about it. We planned everything out one night over a few beers. The idea was simple: sneak into his yard, make some noise, maybe knock on his windows, and scare him a bit. We laughed about how he might freak out, maybe even call the cops, but we knew we'd be gone before anyone could catch us. It was just for laughs. The night we decided to go through with it, I remember feeling a bit uneasy. Something about the plan didn't sit right with me, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be the buzzkill. So we went to his house, huddled together in the dark, whispering and trying not to laugh too loud. We hopped the fence into his backyard, and everything was so quiet. It was almost too easy. We started tapping on the windows, making ghostly sounds, trying to scare him. But instead of hearing panicked shouts or seeing lights turn on, nothing happened. After a while, we saw him through the window. He was just sitting there, staring straight at us. His eyes were so cold, like he wasn't scared at all, like he knew exactly what we were doing and wasn't bothered. That look in his eyes, it should have been a warning. We should have left then and there. But we didn't. We ran off, laughing nervously, telling ourselves the prank had worked perfectly. The next morning, things started to get weird. Sam, one of my friends, found his car tires slashed. All four of them, completely ruined. At first, we thought it was just some random act of vandalism, but then James got these strange calls. Heavy breathing on the other end, never saying anything. Just breathing. It was creepy, but we laughed it off, joking that maybe the old man was trying to get back at us. I think we all knew deep down that something wasn't right, but we didn't want to admit it. Things got worse. I noticed someone following me home one night. I couldn't see who it was, just a dark figure always a few steps behind. No matter how fast I walked, they stayed close, just out of sight. When I finally got home and locked the door, I was shaking. I didn't sleep that night, too scared that whoever it was might try to break in. We met up to talk about it, but none of us wanted to say out loud what we were all thinking, that the old man was behind it. He had to be. But how? He was just one person, and there were three of us. We tried to convince ourselves that it was just a string of bad luck, but we were fooling ourselves. We were scared. Then it got even worse. Sam found his dog dead in his backyard. It wasn't an accident. Someone had done it. He didn't want to believe it was the old man. But who else could it have been? The next night, James woke up and saw someone standing outside his window, just staring in at him. He said the figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched him until he finally ran to wake up his parents. When they got there, the figure was gone. I came home one night to find my house had been broken into. Nothing was stolen, but everything was out of place. Books pulled off shelves, furniture moved, clothes thrown everywhere. It was like someone had gone through my life, searching for something. But what? That's when we all knew. This wasn't just a prank war anymore. The old man wanted revenge, and he wasn't playing games. We were desperate. We decided the only thing left to do was go to his house, apologize, beg him to stop. Maybe he'd forgive us if we showed how sorry we were. So we went back to his house, but it was different this time. The place felt wrong. The door was unlocked, and the inside was dark and silent. We walked in, calling out to him, but no one answered. Then we saw it. His walls were covered with photos of us, pictures taken without us knowing, some from years ago. There were notes too, detailed and disturbing, about where we went, who we talked to, what we liked and didn't like. He knew everything about us. We even found items from our homes, things we didn't realize were missing. Sam's watch, James's keychain, a book from my room. It was like he'd been inside our lives for a long time planning this. We panicked. We wanted to leave, but the door we'd come in through was now locked and the windows wouldn't budge. Then we heard it. Footsteps, slow and heavy, coming from upstairs. I'll never forget the sound, like something out of a nightmare. We tried to stay calm, tried to find another way out, but it was useless. The house was a trap. As the footsteps got closer, I could feel the terror taking over. My friends were just as scared, their faces pale, eyes wide. We had no way out, and the old man was coming for us. I wish I could say what happened next, but everything became a blur. I just remember running, trying to find a place to hide, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't know how it ended. I'm not even sure if I made it out. All I can remember is the feeling of those footsteps getting closer and the cold, empty look in the old man's eyes. If you're reading this, don't make the same mistake we did. Some pranks aren't worth it. Some people aren't as harmless as they seem. I was driving home late that night, so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. The road was long and empty, stretching out in front of me like a never-ending ribbon of darkness. I just wanted to get home and crawl into bed. But then, out of nowhere, I saw him. A man standing by the side of the road, his thumb out, asking for a ride. I should have kept driving. Everything in me told me to keep driving. But it was so dark, so lonely out there. And he looked desperate. I thought, maybe it's safer for him to be in the car than alone out here. So I stopped. He smiled as he opened the door, but it wasn't a full smile, more like a quick, tight grin. "Thanks," he said, sliding into the passenger seat. "I really needed this." "No problem," I replied, though I wasn't sure I believed myself. Something about him felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was just my exhaustion playing tricks on me. We started driving, and he made small talk, said he was heading to a town a little further down the road. He asked where I was going, and I told him, just trying to be polite. But as the conversation went on, I started noticing things that didn't sit right with me. He avoided eye contact, looking straight ahead or down at his hands. And the way he asked questions, like he already knew the answers, like he was testing me somehow. "Long night, huh?" he asked, glancing at me for just a second before looking away again. "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding weaker than I wanted it to. "Just trying to get home." "You live around here?" "Not far," I lied, trying to keep the conversation vague. I didn't want him knowing where I lived. But he pressed on, asking more questions about me, where I was from, what I did. It was starting to feel like an interrogation. His tone was different now, less friendly, more probing. The road ahead was pitch black, the only light coming from my headlights cutting through the dark. No other cars in sight, no houses, no street lights, nothing. Just the two of us, alone in the middle of nowhere. That's when I started to feel truly uneasy. "So, why did you pick me up?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. I shrugged, trying to sound casual. "I figured it wasn't safe for you to be out here by yourself. Or maybe it's not safe for you," he muttered, almost to himself, but loud enough for me to hear. My heart skipped a beat. I forced a laugh, though my throat felt tight. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, and my blood ran cold. I couldn't see what he was pulling out, but my mind raced with possibilities. "A knife? A gun?" "You know," he said slowly, "people aren't always who they seem." He finally pulled out a folded piece of paper, not a weapon, but it didn't make me feel any better. He held it up, as if showing it to me, but I didn't take my eyes off the road. "What's that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Just something I've been carrying around, he said, unfolding it. A reminder, I guess. I couldn't help but glance at it, just for a second. It was a newspaper clipping, old and worn. I couldn't read it, but there was a photo, a man's face, blurry and dark. It looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. You should really keep your eyes on the road, he said, and I snapped my attention back ahead, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The silence between us grew thick, heavy with the tension that was building in the car. I felt trapped, like the air was getting sucked out of the cabin. I needed to do something, anything, to break free from the growing dread. "What's that article about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, colder, sharper. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." My heart pounded in my chest. "Try me." He sighed, a long, drawn-out sound that made my skin crawl. "It's about a man who picked up the wrong hitchhiker. Thought he was doing a good deed, but it didn't end well for him." I could feel his eyes on me now, watching my reaction. I didn't know what to say, didn't know what he wanted me to say. All I could think about was how to get out of this situation. I didn't know this man, but I could feel the danger radiating off him. The road stretched on endlessly in front of us, and I felt like I was driving straight into a nightmare. I needed to think, needed to find a way out, but my mind was blank, frozen with fear. "You don't seem like a bad person," he said, breaking the silence. "But you never really know someone, do you?" I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "No, I guess not." His hand moved, and I flinched, but he just set the newspaper clipping down on the dashboard. "Pull over," he said quietly. My stomach twisted. "Why?" "Just pull over. Now." I hesitated, but something in his voice told me it wasn't a request. Slowly, I eased the car to the side of the road, my hands trembling. I tried to think of a way out, but I was trapped. We were in the middle of nowhere, and there was no one around to help. He didn't move right away, just sat there, staring at the dark road ahead. Then he turned to me, his eyes cold and hard. "Get out of the car." "What?" I whispered, not believing what I was hearing. "Get out. Now." I had no choice. I unbuckled my seatbelt with shaking hands and opened the door. The cold night air hit me, making me shiver. I stepped out, but before I could even think of running, he was out too, standing between me and the driver's side door. "Give me the keys," he said. I hesitated, and he stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. The keys. Now. I handed them over, my hands trembling uncontrollably. He snatched them from me and got back into the car. For a moment, I thought he might just drive off and leave me there. But then, he leaned across the passenger seat and grabbed something from the glove compartment. It was my wallet. He opened it, pulling out my ID. "Looks like you're not too far from home," he said, tossing the wallet back onto the seat. "But I think you'll be walking." Before I could respond, he slammed the door shut, started the engine, and sped off, leaving me alone on that dark, deserted road. I stood there, stunned, watching the taillights disappear into the distance. The silence was deafening. My mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. I was alone, in the middle of nowhere, with no phone, no car, and no idea what to do next. But one thing was clear. I had just escaped something terrible, something that could have ended much, much worse. I started walking, hoping to find help, but every step felt heavy with the knowledge that I might not be so lucky next time. I was exhausted, just wanting to get home after a long day. The elevator doors were about to close when someone rushed in. It was late, and the office building was almost empty. I glanced at the person, a man, maybe in his 30s. with a tired smile. I nodded back politely, thinking nothing of it. We were just two people trying to get home. The elevator started its slow climb, and I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes for a moment. But then, with a sudden jolt, the elevator stopped. The lights flickered, and then everything was still. I opened my eyes, confused. The floor numbers weren't changing, and the usual hum of the elevator was gone. We both looked at the buttons, pressing them several times. Nothing happened. The man reached for the emergency phone, but when he picked it up, there was only silence. No dial tone, no response. I felt a small knot of worry in my stomach, but I told myself it was just a minor malfunction. Elevators stop sometimes, right? We would be out of here soon. At first, we both stood quietly, waiting for help. The man leaned against the opposite wall, staring at the doors as if willing them to open. But as minutes turned into an hour, his behavior started to change. He began pacing back and forth, his footsteps echoing in the small space. He mumbled to himself, too quiet for me to catch what he was saying. I tried to stay calm, focusing on my breathing. I told myself that this man was just stressed, like me. But when he started talking out loud, I couldn't ignore the creeping unease anymore. "It's funny," he said, not looking at me. "Being stuck like this makes you think about things, you know?" I didn't answer, hoping he would stop, but he continued. "I used to work in a place like this. Tight spaces, people crammed together. Sometimes they wouldn't come out the same." He finally looked at me, and there was something unsettling in his eyes. I tried to smile, tried to act like I wasn't bothered, but I could feel my heart beating faster. "That's, interesting," I said, not sure what else to do. I wanted to push the buttons again, to do something, but I didn't want to draw more attention to myself. The man chuckled, a low, throaty sound that made my skin crawl. He kept talking, his voice calm but his words growing more disturbing. He spoke about strange habits, things he liked to do when he was alone, things that made me want to be anywhere but here. I nodded occasionally, trying to keep him calm, but inside I was starting to panic. The minutes dragged on, and I started to wonder if anyone even knew we were stuck. There were no sounds from outside, no signs that help was coming. The air in the elevator felt heavy, and the man's pacing became more erratic. He muttered to himself, louder now, his hands twitching as he spoke. I tried to keep my distance, but the space was so small and every movement felt too close. Suddenly, he stopped and turned to face me, blocking the elevator doors. His eyes were wild, his calm demeanor gone. "We should wait," he said, his voice firm. "Don't press anything. We need to wait it out." My throat went dry. "What do you mean? We should try to get out of here." He shook his head, his expression darkening. "No, it's better this way. We stay here. We wait." Fear gripped me. This wasn't just about being stuck anymore. This man was dangerous. I tried to stay calm, thinking of ways to get out, but he was watching me, his eyes never leaving mine. The tension was unbearable. Every second felt like an hour. I didn't know what he would do next, and I was terrified to find out. I considered making a move for the buttons, but he was too close, too unpredictable. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, he lunged at me, grabbing my arm. His grip was strong, too strong, and I struggled to break free. "You need to calm down," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "We're safe here. We just need to stay." I pushed back with all my strength, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't going to let him trap me here, not like this. I kicked out, catching him off guard, and he stumbled backward, hitting the wall. But before I could react, the elevator jolted, the lights flickered back on, and it started moving again. The sudden motion threw us both off balance, and I barely managed to stay on my feet. The man, now strangely calm, straightened up and looked at the doors as if nothing had happened. When the elevator finally reached the ground floor, the door slid open to reveal two security guards standing outside. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by confusion as the man stepped out, smiling politely at them as if he hadn't just threatened me moments ago. "Everything okay in there?" one of the guards asked, glancing between us. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell them what had happened, but the man cut me off. "Just a little stuck. We're fine now, though." His voice was so normal, so controlled, that I doubted my own memory. Had it really been that bad? Was I overreacting? The guards didn't seem concerned, and the man walked away calmly, disappearing into the night as if nothing had happened. I stood there, shaking, not sure what to do or say. The guards offered to escort me out, and I followed them, still in shock. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting the man to come back, but he never did. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with him, but no one believed me. I wonder if he's done this before, if he'll do it again. And the worst part? I can't prove any of it happened. The remote cabin. A weekend. I'll never forget. I needed a break. Life had been too loud, too crowded, and too fast. So, when I found that remote cabin on a rental site, it felt like the perfect escape. The photos showed a small wooden house, nestled deep in the woods, far from the nearest town. It was exactly what I wanted: peace and quiet. The drive up there was long, with the roads getting narrower and more twisted the closer I got. The cabin was far, really far from anything. When I finally arrived, I realized just how isolated it was. The trees were tall and thick, blocking out most of the sky, and there was no cell service. I didn't mind at first. It was part of the charm, right? A real getaway. But from the moment I stepped out of my car, I felt like something was off. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. As I carried my bags to the cabin, I noticed a group of men standing at the edge of the woods, watching me. They didn't wave or say anything, just stared. It made my skin crawl. I tried to brush it off, thinking they were just curious about the stranger in their town. But their eyes, they looked angry, like I had done something wrong by being there. Inside, the cabin was just as advertised. Cozy, with a fireplace and big windows that looked out into the forest. I unpacked, trying to shake off the weird feeling from outside, but it was hard to relax. Every time I looked out the window, I expected to see those men again, just standing there. But the woods were empty, at least as far as I could see. That night, things got worse. I was sitting by the fire when I heard a noise outside, like footsteps crunching on the gravel. I froze, listening. The sound stopped, and everything was quiet again. Too quiet. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer. But then I heard it again, closer this time, right outside the door. My heart started racing, and I felt that familiar dread creeping in. What if it wasn't an animal? What if it was them? I sat there, barely breathing, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. After what felt like hours, I finally convinced myself to go to bed, though I didn't sleep much. Every little sound made me jump, convinced that someone was out there, watching. The next morning, I decided to head into town, hoping to shake off the fear. Maybe seeing people would help, remind me that I wasn't completely alone. But when I drove into the tiny town, I regretted it almost immediately. The stares started as soon as I parked the car. The locals looked at me like I was some kind of intruder, not even bothering to hide their hostility. I walked into a small store, trying to act normal, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. The woman behind the counter barely acknowledged me, and the few customers in the store didn't speak, just watched me with cold eyes. As I paid for a few supplies, one of the men who had been watching me the day before stepped inside. He didn't say anything, just stood there, glaring at me. When I left, he followed me out, staying a few paces behind. My heart pounded as I hurried to my car, fumbling with the keys. I didn't look back until I was safely inside, but he was still there, standing in the street, watching as I drove away. By the time I got back to the cabin, I was a nervous wreck. I locked the door and checked all the windows, making sure everything was secure. That's when I found the first clue that something was really wrong. The back door, which I hadn't used, was slightly open. I was sure I had locked it. My stomach dropped. Someone had been inside. Panicking, I searched the cabin, looking for any other signs of intrusion. In the bedroom, I found an old, dusty journal stuffed under the mattress. The handwriting was messy, almost frantic, and the entries were short, but they told a terrifying story. The last person who stayed here had written about hearing noises at night, about locals who seemed to be watching them, just like me. The last entry was unfinished, the pen trailing off the page. I knew I needed to leave. But when I went outside to get to my car, I found the tires slashed. Someone had done it while I was in town. I was trapped. As the day turned to night, I could feel the fear building inside me. I kept hearing noises outside, footsteps circling the cabin, low voices whispering in the dark. I tried to call for help, but there was no signal. I was completely cut off. Desperation set in as I started barricading the doors and windows, using whatever I could find. The noises outside grew louder, more insistent, like they knew I was trapped and were just waiting for the right moment to strike. I grabbed a fireplace poker, holding it like a weapon, knowing it wouldn't be enough if they decided to break in. Then, the assault began. The front door shook as someone tried to force it open, and I heard glass shattering from the back of the cabin. I was out of time. In a blind panic, I ran to the side door and threw it open, sprinting into the dark woods. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away. Branches scratched my face and arms as I ran, the cold air burning my lungs. But the sounds behind me didn't stop. They were following me, and they were getting closer. I pushed myself harder, my heart pounding in my chest, terror driving me forward. I don't remember how long I ran. At some point, I tripped and fell, the world going black for a moment. When I woke up, I was still in the woods, the sky just starting to lighten with dawn. The only sound was my ragged breathing. I don't know if I escaped or if they're still out there, watching, waiting. I just know I'm never going back to that cabin. And if you ever find yourself looking for a remote getaway, think twice. Sometimes, the peace and quiet isn't worth the price. I've always taken the last bus home. It's the only way to get back after my late shift. Normally, it's a quiet ride, just me and maybe one or two other people. But tonight, something feels different. The minute I step on the bus, a chill runs down my spine. The bus is almost empty, just like always, but there's something in the air, a silence that feels too heavy, like the bus itself is holding its breath. I slide into a seat near the back, where I can see the entire bus. There's no one else here, just the driver. He's an older man, his face hidden under a worn cap. His eyes catch mine in the rearview mirror, and I quickly look away, feeling awkward. I pull out my phone, trying to focus on anything but that strange feeling crawling under my skin. The bus jerks forward, and we're on our way. The city lights blur past the windows, the usual sights. I've seen them 100 times before, but tonight they seem distant, like I'm watching them from somewhere far away. My mind is tired from work, but I can't relax. Every few minutes I glance up, only to find the driver's eyes still on me in the mirror. Each time his mouth is curled into a smile that seems to grow wider. It's not a friendly smile. It's a smile that doesn't belong on a stranger's face. I shift in my seat, trying to shake off the discomfort. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. I mean, it's late, and I'm tired. People do weird things when they're tired, right? But as the bus continues to glide through the dark streets, the feeling doesn't go away. In fact, it gets worse. The bus takes a turn down a street I don't recognize. My eyes snap up, and I realize we're somewhere I've never been before. The bus slows down, almost to a stop, in front of a row of old closed shops. There's no one outside, no cars, just the bus and the silent night. The driver looks at me again through the mirror. This time, I don't look away. His smile stretches across his face, his eyes almost gleaming in the dim light. It's like he's enjoying this, like he knows something I don't. The bus stays there for what feels like forever, the engine humming softly. I wait for something to happen, for the driver to say something, but he just sits there, watching me, that grin never fading. Finally, the bus lurches forward again, but now my heart is pounding. Why did we stop? And where are we going? I start to feel trapped, like the walls of the bus are closing in. My hands are clammy, and I can't sit still. I need to know what's going on. Gathering what little courage I have left, I call out to the driver, my voice shaking as I ask why we haven't reached my stop yet. He doesn't answer at first. His eyes flicker away from the mirror, and for a moment, I think he's going to ignore me. But then, in a low, gravelly voice, he mutters something about taking a shortcut. His words don't comfort me. They only make my fear grow stronger. The bus turns sharply, taking another unfamiliar road. I'm gripping the seat in front of me now, my mind racing. There's no one around, no lights, no signs of life. Just darkness outside and the growing dread inside. The driver's smile has disappeared, but his eyes are still on me, watching my every move. I don't know what he's planning, but I know I have to get off this bus. I stand up, trying to keep my voice steady as I tell him to stop the bus, that I want to get off. But instead of slowing down, the bus speeds up. My stomach drops as the doors lock with a loud click. The driver doesn't even look at me this time. His eyes are fixed on the road, his hands gripping the wheel like he's on some kind of mission. Panic sets in, my mind scrambling for a way out. I rush to the front of the bus, hoping to unlock the doors myself, but they won't budge. The driver's smile is back, wider than ever, and I feel like I'm trapped in some twisted game. I bang on the doors, shouting at him to let me out, but he just laughs, a low, chilling sound that echoes in the empty bus. I glance out the window, but there's nothing out there, just a long stretch of road disappearing into the night. I'm alone with this man, and no one knows where I am. The fear is overwhelming now, my thoughts a jumbled mess as I try to figure out what to do. The driver's laugh fades, replaced by an eerie silence, and I know I'm running out of time. Suddenly, the bus jerks to a stop. We're in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by darkness. The driver stands up slowly, still smiling, and starts walking toward me. My heart is in my throat, my legs frozen in place as I watch him approach. He's between me and the only exit, and I realize with a sickening dread that there's no way out. I back away, my hands shaking as I try to think of something, anything, to save myself. The driver reaches the door to his compartment, his eyes never leaving mine. The door closes behind him with a final heavy thud. The last thing I hear is the sound of his footsteps, growing louder as he comes closer. And then, there's nothing. The hidden camera. I had just moved into a new apartment, looking for a fresh start after a tough breakup. The place was small, but it felt cozy enough. The rent was cheap, the location was good, and the landlord seemed nice. Maybe too nice. He made small talk when I signed the lease. asking more personal questions than I expected, but I figured he was just being friendly. The first few days went by smoothly, but there was something that made me uneasy, like an itch at the back of my mind. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, but it was there, lurking just beneath the surface of my thoughts. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid after everything that had happened. I was alone for the first time in a long time, so it made sense that I might feel a bit unsettled. Then, one afternoon, while I was cleaning, I noticed something odd about one of the smoke detectors. It was positioned in an unusual spot right above the bed. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just an old building, and the detectors had been installed wherever there was space. But the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. I started paying attention to other details, little things that didn't quite add up. The way the light in the living room flickered at odd times, the slight hum I could hear late at night that seemed to come from nowhere. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a chair and stood on it, reaching up to the smoke detector above my bed. My hands were shaking as I unscrewed the cover. My heart pounded in my chest, and I almost didn't want to look, but I had to know. When I pulled the cover off, I froze. Inside, instead of the usual wires and sensors, there was a small camera, its lens pointed directly at the bed. My stomach dropped. Someone had been watching me. I jumped down from the chair, my mind racing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Who would do this? Why? I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized the answer was obvious. The landlord. He had seemed too friendly, too eager to get to know me. But why would he do this? I didn't know what to think. Panic set in. I started to tear apart the apartment, searching for more cameras. My hands shook as I checked every room, ripping down smoke detectors, prying open vents, and even unscrewing light bulbs. The more I searched, the worse it got. I found cameras hidden in the living room, the bathroom, even in the kitchen. Every move I made had been recorded. I wanted to leave right then, but I felt trapped. Where could I go? Who would believe me? I tried calling the landlord, but when he picked up, his tone was completely different from before. He was cold, dismissive, acting like I was being unreasonable. I tried to explain what I found, but he cut me off, saying something about how I was just imagining things and that I was probably overreacting. I could feel my heart racing as I hung up. I was alone in this. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump, and every shadow seemed to move. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, and the cameras, they were always watching. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, even after I had pulled down all the cameras I could find. I didn't feel safe anymore, but I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was losing my mind, but I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. The next morning, I decided I had to get out. I started packing my things, shoving clothes and essentials into bags as quickly as I could. I was almost done when I opened the kitchen cabinet to grab some food for the road. That's when I saw it. A note taped to the inside of the cabinet door. My hands trembled as I peeled it off and unfolded it. "You've been fun to watch. Thanks for the show." My blood ran cold. My first thought was to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My mind raced, trying to process what I had just read. Someone had left that note for me. They had been watching, and they wanted me to know. I felt sick. How long had this been going on? Was it just the landlord, or was there someone else involved? I didn't wait to find out. I grabbed my bags and ran out of the apartment, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. I didn't stop until I was far away, in a different part of town, where I found a cheap motel and checked in. I didn't feel safe there either, but at least I was out of that apartment. I don't know what to do now. I'm too scared to go back, but I don't have anywhere else to go. I can't stop thinking about those cameras, about that note. I've started noticing things again, little details that don't feel right. The way the mirror in the motel bathroom seems to tilt just slightly, the way the TV flickers even when it's off. I can't shake the feeling that someone is still watching me. I'm scared to close my eyes at night, scared to turn my back. I don't know if it's just paranoia or if there's really something there. All I know is that I can't trust anyone anymore. Not after what happened. Not after what I found. I keep thinking about the person who left that note, wondering if they're still out there, watching. I can't help but feel like they are, like they're waiting for the right moment to show themselves again. Maybe they're closer than I think. Maybe they're already here. I've always been drawn to old houses. They have a history, a character that new builds can't match. So, when I bought this house, I was thrilled. It was cheap, out in the middle of nowhere, and had been empty for years. It was a bit of a fixer-upper, but that was part of the charm for me. I liked the idea of uncovering secrets hidden behind layers of wallpaper and paint. The renovation was going well. I'd already found a few surprises, a walled-off fireplace, an old trunk in the attic, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found next. I was working in what used to be the dining room, tearing down a section of the wall to open it up into the kitchen. That's when I noticed it. The space behind the wall wasn't empty like it should have been. There was a small sealed-off room. I couldn't believe my luck. I was excited at first, thinking maybe I'd stumbled onto some sort of hidden treasure, maybe an old safe or some valuable antiques. But as I knocked a hole in the wall and shone my flashlight inside, the excitement quickly faded. The room was small, barely big enough to stand up in, and it smelled old, like damp wood and dust. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite place. It made my stomach turn. I crawled through the hole into the room, feeling the cold, stale air wrap around me. The room was empty except for a few items scattered on the floor. A broken chair, some tattered clothes, and, most disturbingly, deep scratches on the walls. Long, jagged lines that looked like they had been made by fingernails. My heart started to race as I imagined what could have happened here. Someone had been trapped in this tiny space, desperately trying to get out. I shook my head, trying to push away the thoughts. It must have been a long time ago, I told myself. There was no sign of recent activity, no fresh blood or anything like that. But still, the idea that someone had been kept here, alone in the dark, was hard to shake. I decided I'd seen enough and turned to leave. That's when it happened. The door, the one I had left open, slammed shut with a loud bang. The sound echoed in the tiny room, and I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I rushed to the door, pushing against it, but it wouldn't budge. It was stuck, as if something, or someone, was holding it closed from the outside. Panic started to set in. I could feel the walls closing in around me, the darkness growing thicker, almost tangible. I was trapped, just like whoever had been here before. I started to pound on the door, shouting for help, but I knew it was useless. There was no one around for miles. No one to hear me. No one to help. My mind raced as I tried to think of a way out. I remembered the scratches on the walls, the signs of a struggle, and my panic grew. I was not going to end up like them. I started to kick the door, throwing my whole weight against it, but it still wouldn't move. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with dust and fear. I could feel my breath coming faster, my heart beating out of control. And then, as I stood there, gasping for air, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the far wall, hidden in the shadows, was a small old-fashioned keyhole. I hadn't noticed it when I first came in, but now it seemed to stand out, almost glowing in the dim light. My hands were shaking as I reached into my pocket, feeling for the set of old keys I had found earlier in the house. I fumbled with them, my fingers clumsy with fear, and tried the first one in the keyhole. Nothing. The second one didn't fit either. But the third slid in with a click. My heart skipped a beat. I turned the key, holding my breath, and felt the lock give way. I pushed the door open, half expecting something, or someone, to be standing on the other side. But there was nothing, just the empty, dusty room beyond. I stumbled out, my legs weak, and slammed the door shut behind me, leaning against it as I tried to catch my breath. But even as I stood there, free from the tiny room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The house felt different now, darker somehow. The air was still heavy, and I could feel something, a presence maybe, watching me. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened, but nothing seemed to fit. I kept thinking about the scratches, the clothes, the way the door had slammed shut on its own. And then, as I stood there in the dim light, a thought crept into my mind, cold and terrifying. What if it wasn't just a random discovery? What if the room, the door, the key were all meant for me? What if I wasn't the first person to find that hidden space, and I wouldn't be the last? I left the house that day and haven't gone back. I've tried to convince myself that it was all just a mistake, a series of coincidences, but deep down, I know better. The house had secrets, and I had come too close to one of them. Sometimes, at night, I still hear the sound of that door slamming shut, and I wonder who or what is trapped there now. The disappearance. When my friend Lena and I decided to go to that music festival, it felt like a much-needed escape. We had been planning it for months, hyping each other up every day until the day finally came. The crowd was even bigger than I expected, waves of people moving as one under the heavy beats of the music. The energy was incredible, electric, and for a while, it was everything we had hoped for. But the festival was also chaotic. People were everywhere, bumping into each other, screaming, laughing, lost in their own worlds. It was easy to get separated. I remember thinking, we'll find each other soon, when I realized Lena was no longer beside me. I wasn't worried at first. We had agreed on a meeting spot in case something like this happened, but when I got there, she wasn't waiting. I stood around, waiting, checking my phone, trying to spot her in the crowd. The minutes dragged on, and with every passing moment, the excitement in my chest was slowly replaced by a growing sense of worry. I started walking through the festival grounds, scanning the faces around me, hoping to catch a glimpse of her dark hair or the bright red jacket she was wearing. But the crowd was too thick, too restless. I asked people if they had seen her, described what she was wearing, but no one could help. As the music pounded louder and louder, my heart seemed to beat in time with it, faster and faster. I told myself to stay calm, that maybe she was just enjoying the music somewhere. But as the hours ticked by and the festival started winding down, panic began to set in. By the time the last band was finishing their set, I was desperate. I had combed through every corner of the festival grounds, gone back to our meeting spot multiple times, and still no Lena. When the crowd started to thin out and the vendors began packing up, I knew something was wrong. I called the police. Explaining to them what happened was hard. I was shaking, my voice cracking as I told them how I lost my friend in the crowd and couldn't find her again. They took my statement, but their response was lukewarm at best. Maybe she just went home, or she's staying with someone she met, one of them suggested. But I knew Lena. She would never just leave without telling me. The days after the festival were a blur of anxiety and guilt. I kept replaying everything in my head. What could I have done differently? Should I have held onto her hand, insisted we stay together the whole time? Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, hoping it was Lena. But each time, it was nothing. Just junk emails or messages from other friends who didn't know what was happening. Then, 3 days after the festival, I got a text from her number. My heart leaped when I saw her name on the screen. I opened the message quickly, expecting an apology or an explanation, something that would make all this worrying seem silly. But the message was strange. It just said, "Hey." That was it. I felt a mix of relief and confusion. I texted back, asking where she was, what happened, but the responses were slow, one-word answers like, "here," or "fine." My relief started turning into something else, something darker. The tone was all wrong. This wasn't Lena. At least not the Lena I knew. I asked if she was okay, if she needed help, but the reply was just a smiley face. That's when the cold fear began to creep in. I started questioning the person on the other end, asking them things only Lena would know. They responded correctly, but it felt forced, like they were reading from a script. And then they started mentioning things, details about me, about my life, things I hadn't told anyone except Lena. The messages started to get more personal, more threatening. The person on the other end knew where I lived, where I worked, even what I was wearing that day. My hands shook as I read the texts, each one worse than the last. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. I was left alone, staring at my phone, my mind racing. And then, the final message came. "I'm closer than you think." It was followed by a picture, a photo of me, sitting in the cafe where I had gone to clear my head, taken from just a few tables away. My breath caught in my throat. I looked around the cafe, my heart pounding in my ears, but I couldn't see anyone who looked familiar. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. I left the cafe in a hurry, looking over my shoulder every few steps, my chest tight with fear. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but I didn't know where to go or what to do. All I knew was that whoever was pretending to be Lena was out there, watching me, and they were close. Too close. As I sit here now, typing this out, I can't stop looking out the window, jumping at every small sound. I don't know what they want or why they're doing this, but I know they're not done with me. I don't know if Lena is alive or if I'll ever see her again. I just know that something terrible is coming, and I don't know how to stop it. I'm scared, and I don't know who to trust anymore. If you're reading this, please be careful. If something feels off, trust your instincts. I didn't, and now I'm paying the price. End. I've never been one to drink too much, but last night was an exception. I was out with friends, and the drinks just kept coming. Before I knew it, I was stumbling down the streets, trying to remember which way was home. Everything around me felt blurry, like I was moving through a thick fog. The streetlights flickered above me, and the air was cold, biting at my skin. I walked down the street I thought was mine, my feet dragging as if they were made of lead. The houses all looked the same, dark and quiet, with no one in sight. I fumbled for my keys, my fingers not working right, and I finally found the right one. Or at least, I thought it was the right one. When I reached my front door, it didn't feel right, but I was too tired and too drunk to care. I slid the key into the lock, surprised when the door opened without much effort. The house was dark inside, and a strange smell hit me as soon as I stepped in. It was a mix of old food and dust, something that shouldn't have been there, but I shrugged it off, thinking that maybe I had just forgotten to clean up. The silence was heavy, pressing down on me as I stood there, trying to remember what I was supposed to do next. I felt like I was forgetting something, but my mind was too foggy to figure out what. The only thing I could focus on was the overwhelming need to get to bed and sleep off the alcohol. I took a few steps inside, my shoes echoing against the floor. The sound was louder than I expected, and it made me feel uneasy. The house seemed different somehow. The furniture was in the wrong place, and there were objects lying around that I didn't recognize. A strange lamp in the corner, a chair that wasn't mine, a painting on the wall I'd never seen before. My heart started to race, but I told myself it was just the alcohol messing with my head. Maybe I had moved things around and just didn't remember. I wandered further into the house, feeling more and more unsettled with each step. The hallway was longer than I remembered, and the shadows seemed darker, thicker, almost like they were alive. I was starting to wonder if I was in the wrong house, but I quickly pushed that thought away. This was my house. It had to be. I just needed to get to bed and sleep. But then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the corner of my eye, there was movement, a shadow shifting in the darkness. I turned my head slowly, my breath catching in my throat. There, standing in the hallway, was a figure. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but then the figure moved again, stepping out of the shadows. It was a man, or at least, it looked like a man. His face was twisted, almost inhuman, half hidden in the darkness. His eyes were fixed on me, wide and unblinking, and his mouth was stretched into a grin that was too wide, too unnatural. He didn't say anything, just watched me with that horrible smile. I froze, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. I realized then, with a sickening dread, that this wasn't my house. I had walked into the wrong house, and now I was face to face with the owner, and he was not happy to see me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I needed to get out, to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The man took a step towards me, slow and deliberate, and I could see his smile widening even more. I backed away, trying to remember where the door was, but everything seemed wrong, the walls closing in on me. The door that had been so close now seemed impossibly far away. Panic took over, and I turned to run, but my feet felt like they were stuck in quicksand. I was moving too slowly, and the man was getting closer. I could hear his footsteps behind me, soft but steady, as if he was enjoying this, savoring the fear radiating off me. My hand reached out for the door, but it felt like I was moving in slow motion, every second stretching into an eternity. Just as my fingers brushed the doorknob, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. The man was right behind me, his breath hot on my neck. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My heart was hammering in my chest, my entire body trembling with fear. The door was right there, just inches away, but it might as well have been miles. I was trapped. The man leaned in close, his lips almost touching my ear. "Welcome home," he whispered, his voice soft and sinister. The door slammed shut in front of me, the sound echoing in the dark house. I felt the man's grip tighten on my shoulder, pulling me back into the shadows. The last thing I saw before everything went black was that twisted, monstrous smile, the man's eyes gleaming with something dark, something I couldn't escape. I don't know what happened after that. I woke up the next morning, lying in an unfamiliar bed, in an unfamiliar room. My head was pounding, and my body felt heavy, like I had been drugged. I tried to move, but my limbs wouldn't respond. I was trapped, unable to leave, unable to do anything but lie there, waiting for whatever was going to happen next. And then I heard it. The sound of footsteps outside the door, slow and deliberate, getting closer and closer. The door creaked open, and there he was, standing in the doorway, that same twisted smile on his face. "Good morning," he said, his voice sending chills down my spine. "Did you sleep well?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I could do was stare at him, my mind racing with fear. I knew then that I was never going to leave this place. This was my home now, and there was no escape. I used to think my neighborhood was safe. Every day, I walked home from work the same way, down the familiar streets. I never worried much, even though it was getting darker earlier now. The late afternoon sun was low, making the shadows stretch long across the pavement. It was quiet, just the way I liked it. My thoughts drifted to what I would cook for dinner, maybe pasta, something quick. The weekend was coming, and I was looking forward to doing nothing special, just relaxing. My routine was simple, and I liked it that way. But that day, my routine was broken. I noticed the van a little too late. It wasn't unusual to see cars driving by, but this one was different. It didn't just pass me, it slowed down and stopped right next to me. Before I could even think, the door slid open. Two men jumped out. Their faces were covered, but I could see their eyes, cold and determined. I didn't have time to scream. They grabbed me, one by each arm, and dragged me toward the van. I struggled, kicked, tried to pull away, but they were too strong. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might explode. The sound of the van door slamming shut echoed in my ears, and suddenly, it was dark. I couldn't see anything, only felt the cold, hard floor beneath me. Panic washed over me like a wave, and I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking as I tried to push myself up, but the van was moving fast and I kept falling. I don't know how long I lay there, trying to calm down, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My mind was racing, but it kept going back to the same thought. I was trapped. The men didn't say anything at first, just the sound of the van's engine filled the space. Then I heard them talking, their voices low, almost like they didn't want me to hear. I couldn't make out much, just pieces, something about where to take her and keeping her quiet. I felt around, hoping to find something, anything I could use to defend myself, but there was nothing. My hands touched only cold metal and rough carpet. The darkness made everything worse. I couldn't see my attackers, couldn't see where I was. My heart was racing so fast it hurt. I tried to stay calm, to think clearly, but my thoughts were a mess. I knew I had to get out. I couldn't just wait and see what they planned to do to me. I started by trying the doors, but they wouldn't budge. They were locked tight, and there were no handles on the inside. I pushed against the windows, but they were sealed too. My breath came in short, frantic bursts as I fought the rising terror inside me. I pressed my ear against the wall, listening to the men's conversation. They were talking about me, but not in a way that gave me any hope. They mentioned a place, some remote spot where no one would find me. My stomach twisted with fear. I realized that if I didn't escape soon, I might never get the chance. The van's speed began to slow, and I knew we were getting close to wherever they were taking me. My panic turned to desperation. I couldn't let them take me there, wherever there was. I had to act now. With the van still moving, I threw myself against the door again, using all my strength. It didn't open fully, just a crack, but it was enough. I could see a sliver of light outside. One of the men noticed and turned toward me, shouting something, but I didn't stop. I pushed harder, kicking with my feet, trying to force the door open more. The van swerved as the driver tried to keep control, and I knew this was my only chance. One of the men grabbed me, pulling me back, but I fought with everything I had. I bit his hand, kicked at his legs, anything to get free. The struggle was wild and chaotic. The van lurched again, and the door opened wider. I didn't think, just acted. I threw myself out, not caring about the fall, just needing to get away. The ground hit me hard, knocking the wind out of me, but I didn't stop. I rolled, scrambled to my feet, and ran. I didn't look back, didn't even know where I was going, just ran as fast as I could. My body ached from the fall and my lungs burned, but I kept going, driven by pure fear. I heard the van screech to a stop behind me, the men yelling. I forced myself to run faster, my legs shaking, but I didn't stop. I didn't dare stop. I ran into the trees, hoping the darkness would hide me, praying they wouldn't find me. I don't remember how long I ran or when I finally stopped. I collapsed in a ditch, hiding, shaking, trying to quiet my breathing. My ears strained for any sound, any sign that they were still after me. But there was nothing, only silence. Eventually, I found my way to a road, flagged down a passing car. The driver called the police and they took me to safety, but the men were never caught. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, looking for me. I moved away, far from that town, but every time I hear a van driving by, my heart stops, and I remember that night. I don't know what they plan to do to me, and I never want to find out. All I know is that I survived, but the fear never really went away. I still look over my shoulder, still jump at every sound in the dark. The worst part is not knowing what could have happened. That's the thought that keeps me up at night. I've always been cautious about answering calls from unknown numbers. Usually I just let them ring out or hit decline. But this time, for some reason, I answered. I guess I was bored or maybe just curious. As soon as I picked up, I regretted it. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice neutral. The voice on the other end was calm, almost friendly. "Hey, how's it going?" I frowned. "Who is this?" The voice didn't hesitate. "Don't worry about that. You had pasta for dinner, didn't you?" My heart skipped a beat. I had just finished eating pasta, something I whipped up quickly after getting home. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "Who are you?" I repeated, more forcefully this time. "You live at 2325 Maple Street, right? The blue house with the white fence?" The voice continued as if we were having a casual chat. I stumbled back, knocking over my glass of water. My mind raced. How did they know where I lived? My address wasn't public, and I barely talked to anyone outside of work. "Look, if this is a joke, it's not funny," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm going to hang up now." But before I could move, the voice became sharper. "Don't hang up. I'm watching you right now." Panic started to bubble up inside me. I ran to the window, peeking out through the blinds. The street outside was empty, just like it always was at this hour. No cars, no people. But that didn't calm me down. If anything, it made me more nervous. How can you see me?" I asked, hating the way my voice shook. "I see everything," the voice said. "You're wearing a gray hoodie, aren't you? The one with the little tear on the sleeve?" I froze. I was wearing that exact hoodie, the one I only wore around the house because it was old and comfortable. How could they know that? My breathing got faster, and I felt like the walls were closing in. I started locking all the doors and windows, trying to block out whoever was watching. My fingers fumbled with the locks, and I cursed under my breath. "Stop it," the voice ordered. "It won't help. I can see everything you're doing." My phone almost slipped from my sweaty hand. I pressed it against my ear, trying to stay calm, but it was useless. My mind was racing, imagining all the ways this person could be spying on me. I felt like a trapped animal, every exit blocked by an invisible predator. I decided I needed help, fast. I dialed the police with my other hand, but the line was busy. I tried again, but the same thing happened. My heart pounded as I realized I couldn't reach anyone. Every sound in the house seemed louder now, every creak and groan turning into a potential threat. I ran to the back door, thinking maybe I could make a run for it. But then I hesitated. What if they were out there, waiting for me? I felt paralyzed, not knowing where to go or what to do. As if reading my mind, the voice spoke again, softer now but more sinister. You won't escape. I know everything about you. I know what you did when you were 12, the thing you never told anyone. My blood went cold. There was no way they could know that. It was something I had buried deep inside, a mistake from my childhood that haunted me. I had never told a soul, but this person knew. How do you know that? I whispered, feeling the walls closing in even more. The voice chuckled, low and menacing. I know you, better than anyone else. You've been lying to yourself, thinking you're safe, but I see everything. I felt like I was losing my mind. Was this some sick game? Was it someone I knew, someone close to me? I started to question everyone, my friends, my family. Who could do something like this? My mind was spinning, and I felt like I was drowning in fear. Who are you? I demanded, trying to sound strong even though I felt anything but. What do you want from me? The voice turned cold. I want you to understand. You're not as safe as you think, and I'm closer than you realize. Just then, I heard a noise from the front door, like someone trying to turn the handle. My heart jumped into my throat and I spun around, staring at the door. It was locked, but I could see the handle moving, as if someone was trying to get in. I backed away, my phone still pressed to my ear. What do you want? I repeated, my voice breaking. The voice didn't answer. There was a long silence, then a whisper. See you soon. The call ended, and I was left standing there, staring at the door, the sound of the dial tone echoing in my ears. The handle stopped moving, and the house went silent again, but the silence was worse than the noise. It was thick with fear, wrapping around me like a blanket. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, waiting for something to happen. I didn't know what to do. Should I call someone? Should I leave? Every option seemed dangerous. Just as I was about to gather the courage to move, there was a loud bang, a knock at the door that made me jump. My heart was racing, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. I didn't know who or what was on the other side of that door, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. But I knew one thing for sure. My life was never going to be the same again. And as I stood there, trapped in my own fear, I realized something even more terrifying. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. I decided to go on a solo hike last weekend. I've always enjoyed hiking, but this time I wanted something different, something more challenging. So I picked a trail deep in the woods, far from the usual tourist paths. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape from the noise of the city, a chance to reconnect with nature. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I wanted to be alone. The first few hours were perfect. The forest was quiet, only the sounds of birds and the rustling of leaves under my boots. The trees were thick, their branches forming a canopy that blocked most of the sunlight, making the air cool and damp. I felt at peace, like I was the only person in the world. But as I walked deeper into the woods, something changed. I started to feel strange, like I wasn't alone anymore. At first, I brushed it off as my mind playing tricks on me. Being alone in the forest can do that to you, I thought. But the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it got stronger. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the trail ahead, but the unease followed me like a shadow. I noticed the first sign that something was wrong when I found a broken twig on the path. It looked fresh, like someone had just stepped on it. I paused, listening carefully, but all I heard was my own breathing and the pounding of my heart. I shook my head, telling myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a fox, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I kept walking, faster now, trying to outrun the fear that was slowly creeping up on me. Then I heard it. A rustling sound behind me, faint but unmistakable. I stopped again, turning around quickly, but there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. I felt a chill run down my spine. I wasn't imagining it. Someone, or something, was following me. My mind raced. Could it be another hiker? But why would they be so quiet, almost like they didn't want me to know they were there? I started walking again, my pace quickening with each step. The rustling continued, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but always there, just at the edge of my hearing. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just the wind or some small animal, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger, gnawing at me until I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to get out of the woods, back to the safety of my car, but the trail seemed endless, twisting and turning through the dense forest. I felt like I was going in circles, lost in a maze of trees. I decided to take a break, to calm down and gather my thoughts. I sat on a fallen log, trying to catch my breath. The rustling had stopped, and for a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined it all. But then I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from behind me. My heart skipped a beat. I turned around, and that's when I saw it. A figure, standing in the distance, partially hidden by the trees. I froze, my mind racing. Who was this person? Why were they following me? The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching me. I couldn't see their face, only the outline of their body, dark against the green of the forest. Fear surged through me, and without thinking, I jumped up and started running. I ran as fast as I could, the forest blurring around me as I tried to escape. But no matter how fast I ran, I could still hear the footsteps behind me, matching my pace. The trail seemed to twist and turn, leading me deeper into the woods instead of out. I was lost, disoriented, and terrified. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the figure again, closer this time, still following me. Panic gripped me, and I stumbled, my foot catching on a root. I fell hard, the ground knocking the wind out of me. I tried to get up, but before I could, the figure was standing over me. I looked up, and for the first time, I could see the person's face. It was familiar, too familiar. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a stranger. It was someone I knew, someone I had seen before. But where? My thoughts were a blur, panic mixing with confusion. The person didn't say anything, just stared down at me with cold, emotionless eyes. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask who they were and what they wanted, but no words came out. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear. The last thing I remember is those eyes, boring into me, as everything around me went dark. I don't know what happened next. I woke up hours later, alone in the forest, the figure gone. My head was spinning, my body aching from the fall. I managed to find my way back to the trail and eventually to my car. I never went back to those woods. I never told anyone what happened. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see that face, those eyes. And I wonder if they're still out there, watching, waiting. I don't really know what I was thinking when I decided to explore the old subway tunnel. Maybe it was boredom, or maybe I wanted to prove something to myself. Whatever the reason, I wish I had just stayed home that night. The tunnel had been abandoned for years. The city closed it down when a new line was built, but people talked about it like it was more than just a forgotten piece of history. There were stories, rumors about people who went in and never came out. But I told myself those were just urban legends. I wasn't scared. I should have been. The entrance to the tunnel wasn't hard to find. It was hidden behind a chain-link fence, but someone had cut a hole in it big enough to crawl through. I squeezed through and found myself standing at the mouth of the tunnel. It was dark, of course. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness. The walls were covered in graffiti, mostly old tags from kids who probably dared each other to go as far as they could. The tracks were rusted and broken, and the air smelled damp, like mold and something else I couldn't quite place. I started walking, my footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. It was colder inside than I expected. I wrapped my arms around myself and kept moving, telling myself it was just an adventure. That's when I heard it, footsteps behind me. They were soft at first, almost like they were part of my own steps, but when I stopped, they didn't. I turned around, shining my flashlight into the darkness, but there was nothing there. I told myself it was probably just the echo, maybe a rat or something, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I tried to ignore it and kept walking, but the footsteps didn't stop. They seemed to get closer, but whenever I turned around, I couldn't see anything. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel sweat dripping down my back. Then, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The entrance behind me was gone. I ran back, but the way I came in was blocked by a heavy gate that wasn't there before. It was like the tunnel itself had closed its mouth, trapping me inside. I panicked. I pounded on the gate, shouting for help, but no one answered. The city was far above me, and no one knew I was down here. The footsteps were getting closer now, echoing louder like they were right behind me. I had no choice. I had to go deeper into the tunnel, hoping I'd find another way out. As I moved deeper, the tunnel seemed to change. The graffiti became less playful, more aggressive. Words like help and don't look back were scratched into the walls. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I was plunged into darkness. When it came back on, I saw something that made my stomach turn. A backpack, old and covered in dust, lying in the middle of the tracks. It looked like it had been there for years. I knelt down and opened it, finding nothing but a few old clothes and a notebook. The pages were torn and stained, but I could still make out some of the writing. Trapped, no way out, footsteps, not alone. I dropped the notebook and stood up, my heart racing. Someone had been down here before, and they didn't make it out. The footsteps had stopped again, replaced by something worse. Heavy breathing, coming from just beyond the edge of my flashlight's beam. I whipped the light around, trying to find the source, but all I saw was darkness. I was shaking now, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run, but I didn't know where to go. The tunnel seemed endless, stretching out in front of me like a black hole. Then I saw him. He was standing just at the edge of the light, his clothes torn and dirty, his hair wild and matted. His eyes were wide, almost crazy, and he was staring right at me. I didn't know what to do. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. He took a step toward me, and I could see that his hands were shaking. "They didn't make it," he said, his voice low and rough. "The others. They tried, but they didn't make it." I didn't understand what he meant, but I knew I had to get away from him. He was blocking the path ahead, but there was no way I was going back to where I came from. I took a deep breath and ran straight at him, hoping to push past. But he was faster than I thought. He grabbed my arm as I tried to get by, and I felt a cold, sharp pain in my side. I looked down and saw the glint of a knife in his hand. I struggled, kicking and punching, trying to break free, but he was strong. He pulled me down, and we both hit the ground hard. The flashlight slipped from my hand and rolled away, its beam flickering again. We wrestled in the dark, the sound of our breathing filling the tunnel. I managed to kick him in the stomach, and he let go for a second, just long enough for me to scramble to my feet and grab the flashlight. I didn't think. I just ran, deeper into the tunnel, into the darkness. The footsteps started again, this time pounding behind me, closer and closer. My side was bleeding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know where I was going, but I kept running, hoping to find an exit, a way out, anything. But the tunnel just kept going, twisting and turning, like a maze with no end. The man's footsteps were right behind me now, so close I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. I turned a corner, and there it was, a door, old and rusted, but still standing. I threw myself against it, praying it would open. It did. I stumbled through and slammed it shut behind me, plunging myself into complete darkness. I could hear him banging on the door, screaming, but I didn't stop to listen. I felt along the wall until I found a ladder, old and shaky, leading up. I climbed, every rung sending a jolt of pain through my body. When I reached the top, I found myself in a small, empty room with no other way out. The door below was still shaking, the man still trying to get through. I leaned against the wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I had escaped, but I was still trapped. And then I heard it, the footsteps coming from above. I had been feeling burned out from work, so I decided to book a weekend getaway at a small, secluded hotel in the mountains. It wasn't anything fancy, just a place to relax and clear my mind. The hotel looked simple, almost like a step back in time. The staff greeted me with polite but distant smiles. The lobby had a strange old smell, like a mix of cleaning supplies and dust, but I brushed it off. I was here for peace and quiet after all. When I entered my room, it was just like the rest of the hotel, clean but outdated. The furniture was heavy and dark, the bedspread a dull floral pattern, and the air had a faint chill that made me shiver. But it was quiet, and that was all I really wanted. I unpacked slowly, trying to unwind. That's when I noticed something strange on the headboard. It looked like scratches, almost like someone had taken a knife and carved into the wood. I leaned closer and made out the words, "Get out." My first thought was that it was just a prank, something left behind by a bored teenager or a couple of drunk guests. I laughed a little, but the sound felt forced, echoing too loud in the quiet room. Still, I tried to ignore it. I turned on the TV to distract myself and ordered room service. But even as I ate, my eyes kept drifting back to that headboard. The words seemed to dig deeper into my mind, but I convinced myself it was nothing. Just a joke. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest. I'd had trouble sleeping, tossing and turning all night. When I finally dragged myself to the bathroom to wash my face, I froze. There were new carvings on the bathroom mirror, deep scratches that read, "They are watching." My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a joke anymore. This was something else, something wrong. I could feel it in my gut. I rushed downstairs to the front desk and told them about the carvings. The woman behind the desk looked at me with mild concern but said, "That's impossible. We inspect every room after guests leave. There's no way we would miss something like that." Her voice was calm, too calm. She didn't seem to believe me, but she promised to send someone to check it out. Still, I felt like she was just brushing me off, like I was bothering her with something trivial. Back in my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Every noise, every creak of the floorboards made me jump. I tried to distract myself, but my eyes kept darting to the walls, the mirror, everywhere. Then I heard it, the sound of footsteps outside my door. They were slow, deliberate. I held my breath, waiting for a knock, but it never came. The footsteps just stopped, and I was left alone with my racing thoughts. That night, I couldn't sleep. The TV turned on by itself, the screen flickering to static. I tried to switch it off, but it wouldn't respond. I yanked the plug from the wall and the room was plunged into darkness, but the fear didn't leave. I felt watched, like there were eyes on me from every corner of the room. I was trapped in that cold, old room, and no matter how much I wanted to leave, something held me back. I didn't want to seem paranoid, didn't want to admit that I was scared out of my mind. In the early hours of the morning, after what felt like a lifetime of lying awake, I decided I needed answers. I started searching the room, pulling furniture away from the walls, checking behind curtains, anything to find the source of my fear. When I got to the mirror, something didn't seem right. It was heavier than it looked, and when I gave it a tug, it swung open like a door, revealing a small compartment behind it. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at what was inside: old, blood-stained clothing, wallets, and other personal items. They looked old, worn, like they had been there for years. My hands were shaking as I backed away from the mirror. The messages, the sounds, the uneasy feeling, it all made sense now. These items had belonged to other guests, people who had stayed in this room before me, people who had never left. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to get out of there. I started packing my things in a frenzy, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it. A fresh message carved into the door this time. It read, "You're next." I felt the blood drain from my face. Someone was watching me, someone who knew every move I made. I grabbed my bag and ran out of the room, down the hallway, not stopping until I was in my car with the engine roaring to life. As I sped away from the hotel, I didn't dare look back, but the fear didn't leave me. I kept driving, my mind racing, unable to shake the thought of what I had found. The question haunted me, gnawed at the edge of my sanity. Who had carved those messages? And why had they let me leave when so many others hadn't? Even now, I don't have answers. I don't think I ever will. But the memory of that weekend stays with me, a dark cloud that never really goes away. And every time I close my eyes, I see those words carved into the wood, hear those footsteps echoing in the hallway. I can't forget, even if I try. It started in the grocery store. I was picking up my usual things, just another ordinary day. I didn't notice him at first, but when I reached for the bread, there he was, standing a few feet away, not looking at anything in particular, just lingering. I didn't think much of it. It's a public place, after all. But then I saw him again at the gym. I go to the gym at odd hours, usually when it's nearly empty. I was on the treadmill, focused on my run, and when I glanced up, I saw him in the mirror. He wasn't working out, just sitting on a bench, watching. That's when I started to feel uneasy. It could have been a coincidence, right? Maybe he's new to the area, and we just happened to go to the same places. The third time was outside my apartment. I was coming home late from work, and there he was, standing under the streetlight across from my building. He didn't move, just stood there like he was waiting for something. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. My heart was pounding. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew it wasn't normal. After that, I started seeing him everywhere. I would leave for work, and he'd be at the bus stop, not getting on, just standing there. I went out for a walk, and he was across the street, his eyes never leaving me. It felt like a bad dream, but I couldn't wake up. I changed my routine, different grocery stores, different gym times, but it didn't matter. He always found me. I told a friend about it, but they just shrugged it off. Probably just a creepy guy with nothing better to do, they said. Ignore him and he'll get bored. But how could I ignore it? I started feeling like I was losing my mind. Was he really following me? Or was I imagining it? I decided to confront him, to put an end to this nightmare. The next time I saw him, it was outside a coffee shop. I walked straight up to him, my heart racing, trying to stay calm. "Why are you following me?" I asked. He looked surprised, confused even. "I'm not following you," he said. "I don't know what you're talking about." His voice was calm, almost too calm, like he had rehearsed this. But there was something in his eyes, something that made my skin crawl. "Leave me alone," I said, trying to sound firm. He didn't reply, just stared at me for a long moment before walking away. But it didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. He started getting closer. I would find footprints in the snow outside my window in the morning, fresh ones that hadn't been there the night before. I found a cigarette butt near my back door. He smoked. I noticed that during the confrontation. But what scared me the most was the feeling of being watched inside my own home. I started keeping the curtains closed, but even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was out there, just waiting. I barely slept, jumping at every noise. My friends noticed the change in me, but I couldn't tell them everything. They wouldn't believe me, or worse, they'd think I was crazy. I started doubting myself too. Maybe I was overreacting, seeing things that weren't there. But deep down, I knew it was real. The night it happened, I had finally managed to fall asleep, though not for long. I woke up to a sound, soft, almost like a whisper, coming from downstairs. My heart sank. I knew it was him. I didn't want to move, didn't want to breathe, but I had to. I reached for my phone, trying to dial for help, but my hands were shaking so badly that I dropped it. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed through the silent house. I heard footsteps then, slow and deliberate, moving towards the stairs. There was no time. I had to do something. I grabbed a heavy lamp from the nightstand, holding it tightly as I crept towards the door. My mind was racing. What would I do if I saw him? Could I fight him off? The footsteps got closer, and I could see his shadow on the wall as he reached the top of the stairs. I stepped back, my heart pounding so loud I thought he could hear it. The door creaked as I opened it, just a little to get a look. He was there, at the end of the hall, just standing, like he was waiting for me to make the first move. His face was partially hidden in the darkness, but I could see the glint in his eyes, the slight smirk on his lips. He knew he had me trapped. There was a moment of silence, a standoff where neither of us moved. Then, without thinking, I swung the lamp, hitting the door frame instead of him. The noise broke the tension, and he lunged towards me. I stumbled back, dropping the lamp, but somehow managed to push past him, running for the stairs. I didn't look back. I just ran. My only thought was to get out, get away. I don't remember much after that, just flashes of running through the dark streets, trying to find help. By the time I got to the police station, I was a mess, barely able to speak, shaking uncontrollably. They took me seriously, though, and when they searched my house, they found signs that someone had been there, muddy footprints on the floor, a cigarette butt near the back door. But they didn't find him. It's been weeks now, and I haven't seen him since that night. I moved to a new place, far away from where it all happened. But I still feel like he's out there, somewhere, waiting. Every time I see a man standing too still, or a shadow that lingers too long, I wonder if it's him. Maybe I'm just paranoid, or maybe he's just waiting for the right moment to find me again. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again.